My name is Dulcie Whitford. I am 28 years old. For almost 20 years, my parents called me the slow one, while my sister Miranda gathered Harvard degrees and promises of inheritance. They made fun of my dyslexia at dinner, left me out of important family choices, and paid me far less than they paid her. But on Miranda's graduation day at the Plaza Hotel, in front of 350 guests, a stranger placed an envelope in my hands that would uncover every lie my parents had ever told about me. What they did not realize was that Grandma had been watching the entire time. She saw it all. And she left me something that would turn the whole Whitford empire upside down. The Whitfords were old Manhattan money, the type of family whose last name was printed on hospital wings and museum walls. My father, Gerald Whitford, managed Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire that my grandmother, Eleanor Whitford, had built from a single small Brooklyn office in 1965. By 2024, the company was valued at $92 million. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed when I was 7. The letters on a page would move and shift, turning easy sentences into confusing puzzles that took me 3 times longer to understand than other children. My parents' reaction was not support. It was embarrassment. When I was 12, they hired tutors for Miranda, violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion programs, SAT preparation with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. When I asked about getting help with my reading, my mother, Priscilla, only sighed and said, "Dulcie, we've already spent so much on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children just aren't academic." I was 12 years old. I believed her, so I learned to survive on my own. Audiobooks became my rescue line. I created a system of visual notes, charts, and diagrams that helped me understand information in ways regular reading could not. And every Sunday afternoon, I took the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side, where she would sit beside me for hours, explaining ideas through stories instead of textbooks. "Dooley," she told me once, her worn hand resting over mine. "You read more slowly than most, but you notice things other people miss. That's not a weakness, sweetheart. That's another kind of sight." I did not fully understand her words at the time. I would one day. But first, I had to survive another 19 years of being treated like the family's quiet shame. Christmas 2018, 20 relatives gathered around the long mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above us. Catered food filled the air with rich smells. It was the yearly performance of Whitford family perfection. My father stood at the head of the table, lifting his wineglass. "I'd like to share some news," he said, his voice carrying the same authority he used in board meetings. "Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School, full scholarship." Applause filled the room. Cheers echoed off the walls. Miranda blushed with practiced humility. "My oldest daughter," Gerald continued proudly, "will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She is going to lead this family and this company to incredible heights." More applause. Uncle Richard patted Miranda's back. Aunt Catherine wiped her eyes with a napkin. Then my father's eyes moved down the table until they landed on me. "And Dulcie." He paused. The warmth drained from his voice. "Well, Dulcie is also here." A few relatives laughed quietly. The soft, uncomfortable laughter people make when they do not know how else to react. Miranda did not stand up for me. She laughed too. I stared down at my plate. The roasted lamb became blurry through tears I refused to let fall. Under the table, a hand found mine. Thin fingers, soft skin. Grandma Eleanor, sitting across from me, squeezed gently. When I looked at her, her eyes held something strong, almost angry, and it seemed directed at her own son. She did not speak then. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and told me she needed to show me something important. I did not realize it at that moment, but that Christmas dinner, that small act of cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had started something. Something that would take 5 years to explode. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not an Ivy League, never an Ivy, I applied for a position at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could add value, that the family company could belong to me as well. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant. Salary, $42,000 per year. That same month, Miranda joined as chief legal counsel. Her salary, $280,000 plus bonuses. My daily tasks included photocopying documents, reserving conference rooms, and bringing coffee to executives who never bothered to learn my name. I was not invited to meetings. I was never shown contracts. But I observed, and I listened carefully. During those long hours in the copy room, I discovered something about myself. I could see patterns that others missed. When executives talked about deals in the hallway, I drew diagrams of the relationships between partners, the movement of money, the possible conflicts. A skill I developed to handle my reading struggles had transformed into something powerful. Grandma Eleanor had taught me this. On those Sunday afternoons at her apartment, she would spread out old contracts from the company's early years and show me how to understand them, not word by word, but as systems, as frameworks. "Your father reads contracts like a lawyer," she told me once in 2019, just before her health began to fail. "He looks for what he can take advantage of. You read them like a builder. You see how everything fits together." That same day, she handed me a small wooden box, mahogany with brass hinges. "Keep this safe," she said. "Do not open it yet. When you need it, you will know." I brought the box home, placed it in my closet, and tried to ignore the heavy meaning behind her words. March 2019. Grandma Eleanor's apartment. She was 82 years old then, her once strong body thin, her silver hair light against the cushion of her armchair. But her eyes, those sharp and knowing eyes, were still bright. "Sit down, Dooley." I sat across from her in the living room where I had spent so many Sundays. The walls were covered with photographs. Eleanor breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Eleanor shaking hands with Mayor Koch. Eleanor receiving a Women in Business Award in 1987. There was not a single photo of my father leading the company. "I built Whitford Properties. From nothing," she said, her voice steady with decades of strength. "One office, one assistant, 60 years of effort. Your father—" She paused, something bitter crossing her face. "Your father inherited it. He did not create it. He does not understand what it means to build something from the ground up." She leaned closer. "He judges people by their degrees, their diplomas, their ability to speak in boardrooms. I judge people by how they treat those who cannot defend themselves. And you, Dulcie, are the only one in this family who knows how to be gentle." She pressed the wooden box into my hands again. "Inside is something that may help you one day. But not yet. You are not ready. And neither is Gerald." Her fingers tightened. "When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you will know." I wanted to ask her what she meant, what was hidden inside, why she chose me. But she changed the topic and started talking about her garden, about the book on her table, about the weather outside. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in hospice. I was the only family member beside her bed. The box stayed unopened in my closet, April 2024. The email came on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, "Position restructuring, confidential." "Dear Ms. Whitford, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated effective July 1st, 2024. Human Resources will contact you regarding severance details." I read the message 3 times. The letters shifted and blurred, then settled back into the same painful sentence. They were letting me go. That evening, I remained late at my desk, organizing files that no one would care about. Through the thin wall between my cubicle and my father's corner office, I heard voices. Gerald and Priscilla. "We cannot have her here when Miranda takes control." my father said. It looks unprofessional. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will start asking questions. What kind of questions? My mother asked softly. Why she is not in leadership. Why we have not promoted her. A short silence. Why she is the way she is. My mother answered quietly, almost kindly. We have done everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children simply do not have the ability. Exactly. So she needs to leave. We will give her a generous severance package. She can find something else. Something more appropriate for her skills. I pressed my hand against the wall. $42,000 per year. My small studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 each month. I had no savings, no backup plan. If I lost this job, I would be homeless within 2 months. But it was not the money that made my chest tighten. It was the clear understanding, finally settling deep inside me like ice. My parents had never believed in me. Not once. And they never planned to. If I allowed them to do this, if I agreed with their idea of who I was, I would live the rest of my life carrying the label of family disappointment. Not because I had truly failed, but because I had never been given a real chance to win. Miranda's graduation party was the next day. I kept wondering what other surprises my father had prepared. May 15th, 2024, at the Plaza Hotel in the Grand Ballroom. 350 guests packed the gold-covered room. Business associates, investors, attorneys from elite firms, distant relatives I barely knew. Crystal chandeliers threw, rainbow light across smooth silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played music by George Gershwin softly in the corner. This was Gerald Whitford's kingdom, his stage, the place where he performed as patriarch, as business giant, as the man who owned everything. I stood at the entrance, pulling lightly at the edge of my dress. It was black and plain, $79 from Zara, the most I could manage on my paycheck. Everyone else sparkled in designer gowns and perfectly fitted tuxedos. My mother reached me before I could slip to a chair. Dulcie. Priscilla's eyes moved slowly from my cheap makeup to my worn heels. Her lips tightened. You couldn't find something better? This is what I have. Well, she adjusted her Cartier bracelet with careful fingers. You're seated at table 27, near the service door. Please try not to attract attention. Of course. And Dulcie. She leaned closer, her Chanel No. 5 heavy in the air. Tonight belongs to Miranda. Whatever you're feeling, whatever anger you think you deserve, keep it inside. Do not embarrass us. She walked away before I could answer. Table 27 sat at the very back of the ballroom, half hidden behind a tall pillar. The people at my table were distant cousins I had met, once or twice. From where I sat, I could see the main stage, the huge portrait of Miranda wearing her Harvard cap and gown, the banner that read, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024. Near the entrance stood a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He was not talking, not eating, just watching. His eyes met mine across the crowded room. A chill ran down my back. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra fell silent. The lights lowered. A spotlight shone on my father standing at the center of the stage, holding up a glass of champagne. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate an exceptional young woman. Applause started before he even finished. Miranda graduated in the top 5% of her class at Harvard Law. She completed a clerkship with Justice Reynolds. Last month, she was placed on partner track at Sullivan and Cromwell in record time. Gerald's voice grew larger with pride. But tonight, I am not only celebrating her success, I am announcing her future. Miranda stepped onto the stage, glowing in emerald Valentino. Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate when I pass away. This includes our family home at 740 Park Avenue, valued at $13 million, a Tesla Model S Plaid, and most important of all, he paused so the room would quiet. The position of Chief Executive Officer of Whitford Properties when I retire. The room exploded with cheers. People stood, cameras flashed. Miranda touched her eyes as if wiping away tears. 350 guests celebrating, and not one person looked toward table 27. The cousin beside me leaned close. Dulcie, right? What does that mean for you? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I possibly say? That I had just been officially erased from my own family? That the termination notice waiting in my email was only the first step? That every fear I had ever carried about being useless had just been confirmed in front of everyone who mattered? The clapping slowly faded. Miranda hugged our father. Cameras continued to click. Through the crowd, the silver-haired man by the door began to walk toward me. He moved slowly and with purpose, as if he had been waiting for this exact second. He stopped at my table. Up close, I saw he was in his early 60s, with deep eyes and the careful posture of someone who had spent decades inside courtrooms. Miss Whitford. That's me. I straightened. Can I help you? My name is Jonathan Ellis. He took a card from his pocket. Cream-colored, with raised letters. Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I was your grandmother's lawyer. My grandmother. The words felt heavy. Eleanor had died 3 years earlier. I know, he said calmly. She left something for you, with clear instructions about when it should be delivered. From inside his jacket, he pulled out a thick cream envelope sealed with red wax and stamped by a notary. What is this? Her will. The real one. His voice lowered. The one your father does not know about. I stared at the seal from Morrison, and Blake dated September 12, 2019. 5 months after that quiet Sunday in her apartment. 5 months after, she handed me the wooden box. I don't understand. Your grandmother gave me strict directions. I was to give this document to you on the day your father publicly removed you from his plans. Ellis glanced toward the stage where Gerald and Miranda still smiled for photos. I believe that moment has just happened. My hands shook as I accepted the envelope. Mr. Ellis, what is inside? For the first time, a small warmth showed in his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor told me to say, give this to Dulcie on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she will be ready. He adjusted his tie. I will be available if you have questions. You have my card. Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. I could not breathe inside that ballroom. I slipped out through the service door and found a quiet hallway near the kitchen. Bright lights buzzed above me. The sounds of laughter and music became dull and far away. My fingers trembled as I broke the wax seal.
Inside were 3 pages of close legal writing, a notarized signature, the same date, September 12, 2019. I forced myself to read carefully. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby cancel all previous testamentary
documents and declare this to be my final will and testament. My eyes stopped at a paragraph in the middle. To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I leave 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, currently valued at about $47 million, together with all voting rights connected. To those shares. I read the sentence again and again. 51%, controlling interest. The document continued. This gift is made with full awareness of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulcie. She has been excluded, reduced, and denied chances, not because she lacks ability, but because she lacks support. Dulcie is not slow. Dulcie was abandoned. I will not allow her father's bias to continue after my death. A sob rose in my throat. Grandma had seen everything. She had understood. There was a condition. To activate this gift, Dulcie must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this time frame will make this will void, and all assets will transfer according to my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline would be 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. I leaned against the cold wall, holding the papers tightly. My grandmother had placed a weapon in my hands. Now I had to choose whether I was brave enough to use it. Jonathan Ellis waited near the coat check when I returned. You have read it. The 72-hour clause. My voice felt thin. Why would she include that? Your grandmother knew you, Miss Whitford. He handed me another card with a personal phone, number written on the back. She understood that if you had endless time, you might talk yourself out of acting. The deadline is not meant to punish you. It is meant to give you permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to suddenly value you. Permission to claim what is already yours. He glanced at his watch. The deadline is 8:30 p.m. on May 9th. 3 days. If you choose to move forward, you must submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you prepare it. Through the ballroom doors, I saw my father still smiling for cameras beside Miranda. My mother moved gracefully among the guests, accepting praise as if she had earned Miranda's success herself. If I did this, if I used the will, I would shatter whatever fragile connection remained between us. My parents would never forgive me. Miranda would call it betrayal. But if I stayed quiet, I would accept their judgment. I would become the person they always claimed I was, the failure, the slow daughter, the one who did not matter. Miss Whitford. Ellis's voice cut through my racing thoughts. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this exact night. The real question is whether you believe in yourself. I looked down at the pages in my hands, at the strong signature of the woman who had held my hand during long dinners, who had whispered stories to me during holidays, who had taught me to read contracts the way other people read novels. She used to say that every contract tells a story about power, and the person who understands the language controls the ending. For years I believed I was a side character in my own family's story. Now I held a document that could rewrite the final chapter. I thought about the wooden box she had given me 5 months before she signed this will. Inside it had been old photos, stock certificates, and a simple note that said, "Learn how this works." I had stayed up nights studying financial reports, memorizing company structures, trying to understand the architecture of Whitford properties. At the time, I thought it was only her way of keeping me busy, of giving me something to feel proud about. Now I saw it differently. She had been preparing me, training me quietly while everyone else ignored me. If I called Ellis tomorrow, everything would change. There would be lawyers, there would be anger, there would be headlines in business papers about a family dispute. My father would say I was ungrateful. My mother would say I was selfish. Miranda would look at me with that calm, perfect smile and say I was confused. But the law was clear. 51% was not a suggestion. It was control. I imagined walking into the boardroom, placing the will on the polished table, watching the faces of men who had never bothered to learn my name. I imagined my father's expression shifting from confidence to disbelief. I imagined my grandmother, somewhere beyond this world, nodding quietly as if to say, "Now you see." For years I had waited for someone to choose me, for a teacher to say I was brilliant, for my father to say he was proud, for my mother to defend me. None of that had happened. Maybe this was never about them choosing me. Maybe it was about me choosing myself. The music in the ballroom grew louder again as another speech began. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Life inside that room continued as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. In my hands was proof that I was not crazy, not incapable, not invisible. I had been overlooked, yes. Pushed aside, yes. But not powerless. I folded the pages, carefully, and slid them back into the envelope. I wiped my eyes and straightened my shoulders. The next 72 hours would decide the rest of my life. I was afraid. I would be lying if I said I was not. But fear was something I had lived with for years. Tonight, for the first time, fear stood next to something stronger. Possibility. I met Ellis's eyes. "I will call you tomorrow," I said again, but this time my voice did not shake. And as I stepped back into the ballroom, into the light of chandeliers, and the sound of applause for someone else's success. I no longer felt like the forgotten daughter at table 27. I felt like the quiet owner of a future no one else in that room even knew existed. I said, "We are requesting that board meeting." Ellis gave a small, controlled smile. She said you would. I'm going to stop here for just a second. If you have ever been underestimated by people who were supposed to trust you, if you know how it feels to be ignored or brushed aside, I want you to comment the word "enough" below. Let me know I am not alone in this. And if you want to see what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching, because this is only the beginning. Now, back to the story. That evening, back in my small, cramped apartment in Queens, I finally opened the wooden box. My roommates were sleeping. The only light came from the street lamp outside my window, throwing orange lines across my bed where I sat cross-legged, the dark mahogany box resting in my lap. The brass hinges made a soft creaking sound as I lifted the lid. Inside, there was a handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, a faded document stamped with a 1965 date, and a USB drive, smooth and modern, clearly placed there years later. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Dulcie, if you are reading this, then Jonathan has completed his responsibility, and your father has done exactly what I was afraid he would do. I am sorry I could not protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed paper is the original partnership agreement from 1965 when I founded Whitford Properties with two partners who have long since passed away. Your father has never seen this version. It states clearly that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be reduced or transferred without full board approval. The USB contains something else, something your father hoped I had forgotten. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to cut my voting rights from 51% to 10%. His public reason was that I was too old to understand modern business practices. The true reason was simple. He wanted full control, and I was standing in his path. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for the way he treated you in order to justify it, as if putting you down somehow proved I was no longer capable. Use this wisely, Dulcie, not for revenge but for justice. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. My hands were shaking as I plugged the USB into my laptop. The file was labeled Board Meeting Minutes March 2018 PDF. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of authority, documented with dates and timestamps. Clear evidence. May 16, 9:01 a.m. Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Dulcie Whitford. Her voice carried the rough edge of someone who had smoked for years and laughed even longer. I have been wondering when you would call. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 1970s. She talked about you all the time. There was a short pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, just before she passed away. I tightened my grip on the phone. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you are thinking about doing. That is not exactly the same thing. Margaret's tone changed. It became sharper, more professional. You want to request an emergency board meeting. That requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I am one. You will need 2 more. Can you help me reach them? I can do better than that. I heard papers moving in the background. Gerald Whitford is not as popular as he believes. His management style is, let us say, controlling. At least 4 board members have privately shared concerns. They just need someone willing to step forward first. Hope lit up inside my chest. Who? Richard Holloway? Susan Parker? They have both been on the receiving end of Gerald's temper during closed sessions. I will make some calls. Another pause. Dulcie, you need to understand something. This will not be pleasant. Your father will fight back. Your sister will fight back. They will say harsh and ugly things. They have been saying harsh things my entire life. At least now I will have the chance to answer. Margaret laughed, a warm and real sound. Eleanor always said you had steel under that quiet surface. I am beginning to understand what she meant. She cleared her throat. I will have the petition ready by tonight. Board meeting request, May 18th, 10 a.m. Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Do not thank me yet. Thank me when you are sitting in that boardroom. May 17th. Gerald found out about the board meeting at exactly 4 p.m. I know this because Miranda called me 45 minutes later, her voice tight with controlled anger. What did you do? I was sitting in my cubicle at Whitford Properties pretending to organize paperwork. I do not know what you are talking about. Dad just received a notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Requested by Margaret, Coleman, and 2 other directors. There was a pause, sharp as shattered glass. Margaret Coleman has not requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about how the company is being managed. Do not play games with me, Dulcie. Miranda's calm voice cracked. If you are trying to embarrass us, trying to cause some kind of scene, I am simply doing my job, Miranda. The same as always. She ended the call without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Gerald walked quickly past my cubicle on his way to his office. He did not look at me, did not admit I was there, just slammed his door hard enough to shake the windows. I could hear him on the phone. This is a ridiculous waste of time. Margaret is probably going senile. We will listen to her concerns and move forward. No, I am not worried. Dulcie, my God, Miranda. She can barely read a spreadsheet. She is not a threat to anyone. I smiled quietly to myself. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like a hidden advantage. That night in my apartment, I prepared carefully. I printed 3 copies of the will. I downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as a backup. I wrote a short statement, not an attack, just a clear presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed he would attend as the attorney to authenticate the documents. Margaret sent me a text at 11 p.m., petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept, but this time it was not fear-keeping. Me awake. It was anticipation and determination. May 18th, 2024, 9:45 a.m., Whitford Tower. The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble floors. The kind of corporate luxury meant to intimidate visitors. I stepped out wearing a borrowed gray blazer from my roommate, 2 sizes too large, carrying a leather portfolio I had bought at Goodwill for $12. The security guard standing at the boardroom door lifted his hand. Name, Dulcie Whitford. He checked his tablet and frowned slightly. You are not on the authorized list of attendees. I am an employee of Whitford Properties and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I cannot allow you to enter. Is there a problem here? Miranda's voice came from behind me. I turned around. She looked perfect and polished. Navy blue power suit, a Hermes scarf around her neck, the uniform of someone who clearly belonged in executive spaces. Dulcie. Her smile did not reach her eyes. What exactly are you doing here? I have information that needs to be presented to the board. Information. Miranda gave a short, sharp laugh that sounded rehearsed. About what? You work in the copy room. The details of my presentation are confidential. You do not even know what ROI means. Return on investment. It is not very complicated. Miranda's smile flickered for a second. Before she could respond, our father appeared at the end of the hallway with 2 senior executives beside him. What is happening here? Dulcie wants to attend the board meeting, Miranda explained. I was just telling her that is not possible. Gerald looked at me the way he always did, like I was something unpleasant he could not remove. Dulcie, go back to your desk. This does not concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom, it does concern her. Margaret Coleman appeared in the doorway, 72 years old, silver hair, standing with the calm authority of someone who had been building companies when Gerald was still a child. I invited her. She has the right to address the board. Margaret smiled slightly. Let her come in. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a brief moment I thought he might block the entrance himself. But Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years, Her authority in that room was stronger than his. Fine. My father's voice was cold. Let her speak. We will see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. The boardroom was smaller than I had imagined in my mind. An oval table made of polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives on the walls, including my grandmother Eleanor, her painted eyes seeming to watch from above the fireplace. 12 board members took their seats. Gerald at the head of the table, Miranda to his right, not officially a board member yet, but clearly positioned as his chosen successor. I was directed to a chair at the far end, the corporate version of a children's table. In the corner of the room, Jonathan Ellis sat quietly with his briefcase. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who had known my grandmother for many years, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Margaret, you may begin. Margaret rose slowly from her seat. Thank you, Robert. I will keep my comments brief. She gestured toward me. The issue I want to talk about concerns a document that has recently come to light, a paper that affects the ownership structure of this company. I give my time to Miss Dooley Whitford. All eyes turned toward me, and Miranda gave a small smirk. Gerald leaned back in his chair with clear, dramatic boredom. I stood up. My hands were steadier than I thought they would be. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak today. I opened my portfolio slowly. What I am about to present may surprise some of you. I only ask that you listen carefully to the evidence before making any judgments. Gerald let out a loud sigh. I chose to ignore him. Before I could continue, my father lifted his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable time. Gerald stood up, buttoning his jacket very slowly on purpose. I need to give some background information. Gerald, Margaret began. Dulcie is my daughter. His voice carried that fake warmth he used when dealing with difficult clients. And I love her, but she is not qualified to address this board on any business matter. She works in an administrative position. She has no legal education, no financial training, no strategic experience. Miranda joined in, her voice full of false sympathy. Dooley also has dyslexia. She struggles with reading. We've tried to help her, but she gave an elegant shrug. Some limitations cannot be fixed with effort alone. A few board members shifted in their seats uncomfortably. What we are seeing here, Gerald continued, is a troubled young woman reacting emotionally. Maybe because of the announcement at Miranda's graduation party. Sibling jealousy is... Mr. Whitford. Robert Hartley's voice cut through the room like a gavel striking wood. You will have your chance to respond, but Miss Whitford requested this time, and she has the right to use it. Gerald slowly sat down. His expression promised consequences later. Miranda looked at me and mouthed, You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at both of them, my father and my sister, and felt something shift inside me. It was not anger. It was something colder and clearer. They were not trying to protect me. They were not even trying to protect the company. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the version where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I took the document out of my portfolio. I will not be discussing my reading skills today. I will be discussing this. I held up the will. The room fell completely silent. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, founder of this company, notarized on September 12, 2019. Gerald's face lost all color. That's impossible. Gerald's voice sounded tight and strained. My mother's will was signed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her earlier will. I kept my voice calm and steady. Under New York Estates Powers and Trusts law, a later valid will automatically cancels all previous testament documents. This will, I placed it carefully on the table, was signed 4 years after the one you have. I slid the document toward Robert Hartley. Mr. Ellis. I gestured to Jonathan, who stood from his seat in the corner. Would you please confirm that this document is authentic? Jonathan walked to the table. I am Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Eleanor Whitford's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm that this will was signed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original copy is held in escrow at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley studied the pages carefully, his eyebrows lifted. This will bequeaths 51% of Whitford Properties shares to... He looked up at me. To you, Miss Whitford. Murmurs moved around the table. That's a forgery, Miranda said, but her voice no longer sounded confident. It is not, Jonathan replied immediately. And I strongly advise you not to accuse anyone of fraud without proof, Miss Whitford. Morrison & Blake's reputation speaks for itself. Gerald slammed his hand hard against the table. This is ridiculous. My mother was sick. She was being influenced. Influenced? I took out my phone. Maybe you would like to explain this then. I pressed play on the 2018 board meeting recording. My father's voice filled the room. Eleanor is 81 years old. She does not understand modern business. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy and complete. That recording. Gerald's face had turned a dark shade of purple. That was a private board discussion, which Eleanor attended. I kept my voice firm. She recorded it, as was her right as a shareholder. Robert Hartley placed the will down on the table. His expression had changed from neutral to serious. Miss Whitford, would you please read the important passage aloud for the record? I nodded, and took a steady breath. To my granddaughter, Dulcie Ann Whitford, I leave 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties, LLC, along with all voting rights connected to them. I paused, allowing the words to sink in. This gift is made with full awareness of my son Gerald's treatment of Dooley. She has been excluded, minimized, and denied opportunity, not because she lacks ability, but because she lacks support. Miranda made a shocked, choking sound. Dooley is not slow. Dooley was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I looked directly at my father. Gerald has confused credentials with character, degrees with value. He tried to remove my voting rights because I saw through him. He pushed Dulcie aside because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to become. Gerald said nothing. His hands, I noticed, were shaking. The will continues. I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Dooley. Robert Hartley slowly removed his glasses. Jonathan, you confirm this document is legally valid? I do. The 2015 will has been replaced. As of this moment, Dulce Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret. Coleman gave a small, quiet smile. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged meaningful looks. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This proves nothing, Miranda said, but her voice sounded fragile now. Even if the will is valid, which we will challenge, Dooley has no business experience. She cannot run this company. I am not asking to run the company. I looked at the full board. I am asking you to look at the facts. I removed the 2018 board minutes from my portfolio. March 14th, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018-07 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated reason, I found the line, the founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. That was taken out of context, Gerald said quickly. The resolution failed by 2 votes. Eleanor's vote and Margaret Coleman's. I turned to Margaret. Is that correct? She nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor called me that evening. She was heartbroken. Not because of the resolution, she knew it would not pass, but because her own son had tried to take away everything she had built. This is old history, Gerald began. It is evidence. I interrupted him calmly. Evidence that my grandmother was not suffering from reduced mental ability when she wrote the 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son. And she was protecting me. Robert Hartley looked around the table. Does anyone have documents that contradict what has been presented? Silence filled the room. Gerald. My father's jaw tightened, but no words came out. Miranda. My sister stared down at the table. Her perfect composure had completely fallen apart. Richard Holloway spoke for the first time. Robert, I believe we should take a short recess and allow legal counsel to fully review these documents. Agreed. Hartley checked his watch. We will reconvene. In 15 minutes. Jonathan, please stay available. The board members stood up. Quiet conversations began in low voices. Gerald did not move. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at his mother's portrait hanging on the wall. I wondered if he could almost feel her watching him. 15 minutes turned into 45. The board's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson, whom I had never met before, spent the entire time on his phone with Morrison and Blake, with Chase Private Client, and with the New York State Court Records Office. He stepped into the hallway twice, speaking in urgent whispers. When he returned, his face looked serious, almost pale. I remained seated at the long table. I did not look at my father. I did not look at Miranda. Instead, I looked at my grandmother's portrait. She had always told me that truth does not shout. It waits, and when it is ready, it stands on its own. Finally, Patterson came back into the room and nodded to Robert Hartley. They spoke quietly for a moment. Then Hartley called everyone back to their seats. We are reconvening this meeting, he announced. Counsel has completed an initial verification of the documents provided. Gerald straightened in his chair. Miranda clasped her hands tightly together. Patterson cleared his throat. I have personally confirmed with Morrison and Blake that the 2019 will was properly executed. I have confirmed with Chase Private Client that the original document is held in escrow. I have also confirmed with the New York State Court Records Office that no later will has been filed. He paused. Based on the information available at this time, the 2019 will appears valid and legally enforceable. The words seemed to echo in the large room. Gerald stood abruptly. This is not over. We will contest this will. We will challenge capacity. We will challenge influence. That is your legal right, Patterson replied calmly. However, until a court rules otherwise, the will stands as written. Robert Hartley folded, his hands on the table, which means, effective immediately, Miss Whitford holds 51% of the voting shares of this company. A long silence followed. I could feel every pair of eyes on me again, but this time it felt different. Not pity, not doubt. Something closer to respect, or maybe uncertainty. Gerald slowly sat back down. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. Miranda's voice was small. What do you want? It was the first honest question she had asked all day. Looked around the table at the board members, at the company my grandmother had built from nothing, at the legacy that had nearly been taken from her. I want transparency. I want fairness. I want decisions made for the good of this company, not for personal power. I turned to my father, and I want the record to show that I was never the problem. No one laughed. No one dismissed me. For the first time, they were listening.
If you like the video, then subscribe our YouTube channel.